Hello and welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Today, we are going to be talking again about another post that was made, a post you've probably been seeing going around the internet, a post that is quite disturbing, to be honest with you. I posted about this video that happened at the RNC, the Republican National Convention. Apparently it was at the end. It was a particular prayer given by, I forget the lady's name, but it was given by her, and it was disturbing. So I posted today about this particular prayer, talking about basically that the RNC is now having people pray to demons, which isn't necessarily surprising. Like, that's not the surprising part. If you go on Instagram, you'll see that I'm not really surprised that a political party is going to do really anything at this point, because political parties are going to do what they're going to do to try to get votes. That's just the reality of it. But what I was surprised at was it didn't seem like, at least from the video that was being shown, and we'll watch it here in a minute, that a lot of people were leaving. Now, the reason that that's concerning is because not that the Republican National Convention is a Christian organization. Clearly it's not. But there are a lot of Christians or people that would claim Christ that are there. And so it was interesting to have this prayer. So I made a post basically saying that I was surprised that there was somebody praying to demons. And a lot of people were like, well, hold on a second. So you're saying that, why is this a demon? Why would you say that they're praying to demons? Well, there's a reason for that. But let's watch it first, and then we will talk about it. So let's go over to the review screen. And let's watch this, and we're going to watch. It's only a minute and a half, and then we'll be right back.
Dear Waheguru, our one true God, we thank you for creating America as a unique haven on this earth where all people are free to worship according to their faith.
Now, real quick, I was going to watch it all the way through, but I just want to go back. Now, if you look at here, this is very interesting. So we have up on the left-hand corner over here, we have a church. Over here, we have a cross, right? There's Christian symbols here, but this prayer is happening, right? So I just wanted to point, I didn't see that and really talk about that the first time, but it is really interesting. So let's finish it out.
Unique haven on this earth where all people are free to worship according to their faith. We seek your blessings and guidance for our beloved country. Please bless our people with wisdom as they vote in the upcoming election, and please bless with humility, honesty, skill, and integrity all those who conduct the election. Finally, we thank you for the Chardi Kala spirit that we have witnessed in President Trump. That is, the tireless and uplifting spirit that is sustained even in the face of violent adversity, like a founding father centuries ago. And we thank you, dear God, for protecting his life. We thank you for his examples of nirbha, fearlessness, and nirver, the absence of hate when faced with vitriol. These examples of extraordinary calm inspire us. Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Bane Sarbatta Pala. May your name forever be exalted, spreading happiness and blessings and good spirit, that everyone may prosper and enjoy the grace of your peace. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the prayer. Now, I want to work through, because the thing that we talked about on Instagram today within the post was that this was a prayer to demons. That was the whole thing that we were talking about, is that this is essentially a prayer to a demon. And there was a lot of people, a lot of concerning things in the comment section that were basically like, hey, it's not a demon. This is how she understands God, or it's not a demon, it's a false God, or it's not a demon because just all sorts of really weird reasoning. So what I want to do today is work through this and work through it in a scriptural way so that we can really kind of get to the bottom of this. Now, it's really important to know that within the Old Testament, we don't have a Hebrew word for demon. Now, when you go to, when you get to translation and transliteration, we do get demon out of some of the words being used here. And actually, the ESV, in one of the passages we're going to look at, actually gives it a really close rendition of what the original word is. But that being said, the first place we're going to go is Deuteronomy chapter 32. So if you have your Bibles, you can go there. I'm going to put this up on screen. What we're looking at here specifically is a song of Moses. Basically, it's at the end of his life. He's reciting it back to the Israelites, and it's about basically their journey. Now, there's a particular part in here, verse 15, where he starts talking about when they worshipped idols, and there's this word that's actually transliterated as demon. We'll talk about it. But it starts at verse 15. It says, "But Jerusalem grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then you forsook God who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods." Now, it's important, like that phrase, strange gods, within the Old Testament, because we hear a lot of talk about Moloch and Baal and Dagon and stuff, right? And there's this idea of there's these other gods. Now, again, lots of study has been done on this, but what we seem to see, at least, is that these strange gods, because there's not actually a word for demon, it's just other entities, right? Demonic sort of presence. And so they stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were not gods. And so what we have here is this idea of them sacrificing to demons. There's this thing they're doing that is not to Yahweh, that is not to God, and they're sacrificing to gods they had never known. Now, see, this is where it gets. We'll clear this up a little bit as we work along, but in this particular passage, they sacrificed to demons that were not gods, to gods, right? So this is who they're sacrificing, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently. This idea is we start seeing this text outline that this is something the Israelites have done. And there seems to be some equation to this reality that, hey, they're sacrificing to strange gods, to demons, and this is what they're doing. Now, the second passage we're going to look at, give me 1 second to get there, because this program I use, by the way, if you guys are looking for this thing that I mark up and use in all the sermon reviews, it's the ESV Digital Journal. You can download it yourself. It's very helpful. But the second thing we're going to look at is going to be in Leviticus, and it's going to be chapter 17, if I can just get there real quick. And this is the second part, or the second set of verses we're going to be looking at. And this is actually a very interesting one, because the way that it translates, that it's going to be translating in a way that that is actually more close to the original text. So we're going to go Leviticus chapter 17. Sorry, this thing is just not. Here we go. Finally. 17. And what we're going to look at here is we're going to start at verse 1 in chapter 17. So, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the people of Israel, and say to them, This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. If any of you of the house of Israel kills an ox or a lamb or a goat in the camp, and kills it outside the camp, and does not bring it into the entrance of the tent of the meeting, to offer it as a gift to the Lord in front of the tabernacle of the Lord, blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. He shall shed the blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. This is to the end that the people of Israel may bring their sacrifices that they sacrificed in the open field, that they may bring them to the Lord, to the priest at the entrance of the tent of the meeting, to sacrifice them as sacrifices of peace offerings to the Lord. And the priest shall throw the blood on the altar of the Lord of the entrance of the tent of the meeting, and burn the fat for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons." Okay, that's what we were trying to get to. So there is this instruction here of how sacrifices shall be done and what that looks like. But there's this little verse here that in verse 7, "So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons, after whom they whore." Now, the original word within the Hebrew that sort of translates as demon or gets transliterated as demons is like hairy goat or goat-like creature, right? There's this sort of symbolism that doesn't quite translate very well, but it basically gets translated as demon. So the idea is that we see two examples here in which the Israelites have either in the recounting of what Moses is recounting to them, or within just the instruction of how to sacrifice, that like, you guys have done this before, and when you have sacrificed wrongly, you have sacrificed to false gods and to demons, and you shouldn't do that anymore. Now, we don't really have a ton of verses on this, other than it's very clear throughout the Old Testament that when you are worshiping other strange gods or other gods, or whenever you're doing something that is not to God, when you're worshiping something other than God, Yahweh, then there are things that is bad, obviously, right? That is rebellion. Now, what we do see, and this is going to be our third text, and I posted about this today in the stories over on Instagram, is 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And this is where Paul is talking about idols and sacrificing to idols. Corinthians have an issue with that. That happens a lot. And so what happens here, it's a warning against idolatry. We're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. We're going to go ahead and start at verse 14. Okay? Now, when we get to verse 14, we start, and it says this. See, we're going to start right here. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless is not a participation in the blood. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? The bread that we break, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one bread. We who are many are one body, for we all partake in one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I imply that what pagan sacrifices offer, they offer to demons. Okay, this is a verse we posted about today. This idea that we are not, that people are not praying to demons whenever they pray to other gods is put to an end here within the text. Now, again, it's not something that the text talks about a lot. In fact, in the two Old Testament passages, Deuteronomy and Leviticus, both of them that we cover, are talking specifically about the reality that Israel has sacrificed to other gods before that are demons. So it's just sort of a passing text of, you did this thing, you shouldn't be doing this thing anymore. This is how you properly sacrifice. By the time we get to the New Testament, Paul clearly sees that sacrifices that pagans offer to idols are sacrifices to demons. This idea is simply this: God is over all, and he is the Lord above all things. He's the only one worthy of praise. He's the only one worthy of sacrifice. He's the only one worthy of worship. And so whenever it is deviated to something else, especially an idol or another god, then it is a demon, and it is a demonic entity that is being worshipped. And so this idea, whenever this particular individual did the prayer to the Wagandru, right, the reality is, and I had to look some of this up, is that, and I think this is where people are getting confused. Let me try to pull this up really quick if I can. Let me show you this screen. So here is the basic page that goes over, and I don't know if you can see this a ton. I'll link it in the description below. But the Wagandru, right, is a distinctive name for the supreme being. Now, here's where things get really confusing. And I'm sorry, you likely cannot see this, but I'll link it below. It says, it is a supreme being like Yahweh in Judaism or Allah in Islam, right? There's this comparison, and I think this is where people are getting super confused because they just don't know, right? The reason this prayer is offered up at the RNC. And the reason that some people have no issue with this prayer at all is because they're going, well, it's just like, it's the supreme being. It's the one that's over all. It's the deity. It is the great deity in the sky. Like, we all, like, it is the essence of, we all pray to the same God. Like, it's the essence of that mindset. And so, luckily, there are a lot of Christians that have made a lot of noise about this, because the reality is, as believers, we should at least know what we believe enough to go, that's not it. Like, that is not, like, freedom of religion aside, the reality is that is not anywhere close to the God that we as believers worship. It is not the great deity in the sky. It is not, the great all-knowing force, right? It is Jesus Christ that we worship. And anybody, any deity, any God outside in any other religion is not, they are a false God. And when we look at the scriptures, the best sort of descriptor we get for these false gods are either strange gods or demonic entities. And so the reality is, like, you can try to play nice with this idea of, like, well, I respect other religions. The reality is, other religions worship demons, right? And you don't like that idea because it sounds mean or it doesn't sound inclusive. But the reality is, Jesus was quite clear when he was here. God has been quite clear throughout Scripture that he is the only one. And in fact, we have this shown throughout the scriptures, especially if you read through like Acts, for example, or the Gospels. You have people within the Greek culture that would be known as God-fearers. You have that title used a number of times. Cornelius, for example, is a God-fearer. And God-fearers, by definition, they're not proselytes, so they haven't like converted to Judaism, but they have heard of the God Yahweh. And they respect the God Yahweh, and they burn alms, or they give alms to the temple, because they at least respect Yahweh as God. And then the next step up would be obviously a proselyte, which is a conversion, somebody that converts from being a Greek citizen or a Gentile into Judaism. And so what we start seeing is, when you read through the New Testament, there are people that at least realize that Yahweh, right, is God over all, or he's a very powerful God, right? This is the Greek understanding of it, at least. And then what we see in the Gospels and in the New Testament is that Jesus is God. And so we start seeing people convert over to become Christians, to become followers of Jesus, and give up their other religions. Right. The one thing that all throughout the Old Testament we see that is always condemned is what would be called syncretism. This idea that you can combine Yahweh with other gods and it's okay. Over and over and over again, we see this condemned. Over and over and over again, we see them punished for doing that. And so one of the things you have to understand is that whenever you have a believer, one of the things that I think, let me restate this maybe in a way that's hopefully more understandable. As believers, we only worship Christ. We're not syncretistic. We don't combine Christ with other gods. And so this idea is that whenever we see somebody praying this Hindu prayer to this great divine deity, as believers, we should hopefully be heartbroken, because you are praying to a demon. You are praying to a false God that you think is going to hear you and is going to help you and is going to do whatever fulfillment. In fact, within this particular religion, there is this idea. The significance of the Wagandu represents the ultimate truth and reality, and the goal of the Sikh spiritual journey is to realize and merge with the Wagandu, which is this great deity, through devotion, meditation, and righteous living. And so this idea is that in this particular instance, this particular woman that was singing or praying this prayer, is that her great goal is to one day become one with this great deity in the sky through devotion and meditation and righteous living. The reality is that's not going to happen, right? God has taught throughout time and fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus Christ the reality that there is one way to be reconciled to the Father, and that is through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so everything else is false. And I know that sounds insensitive, not inclusive, not very friendly. But the reality is, throughout time, Christians have stood their ground and said one thing, and one thing very clearly. You need to be reconciled to the Father, and the only way to be reconciled to the Father, the creator of all things, is through Jesus Christ, his Son, that lived the life you couldn't live, died the death you should have died, and rose in defeat of sin and death so that you can be made right with the Father and be reconciled to him. And the idea is that whenever we start allowing these things to happen and don't question them, don't push back on them, there is this at least unspoken idea that we're okay with it. And as Christians, we've been really tricked, I think, into this idea that we have to be nice to everyone and not speak up at all. Because if we do, God forbid, you're going to be thought to be a hateful bigot. But the reality is, the scripture teaches, we see lived out throughout the scriptures and throughout the early church, that the reality is that we call people to reconciliation to the Father through Jesus and out of false religions, out of the doctrines of demons, and to the truth of Jesus Christ. And so when we see a prayer prayed like that, right, when we see somebody, let me bring this back up real quick. When we see somebody like this praying to a false god, saying things that are not true, and really leading people in prayer to a false god, it should be concerning to us, because what's happening is people are being led away with this idea just by the iconography here with the cross and the church and this just acceptance of what's going on, right? That, oh, this is the same God. It's not the same God. This is the visual image of the coexist sticker, and that's just simply not true. And as Christians, we need to be able to speak to that. So when somebody says, well, how is the sheep God not the same thing as the Christian God? Because isn't God above all, and isn't he everywhere, and isn't he omnipresent? Like these are similar things to the God that they worship. And it's simply the reality is no. And you have to be able to have confidence to tell somebody, no, the God you worship is a false God. And you want to talk about a difficult, awkward conversation, there's a difficult, awkward conversation for you to have. But the reality is a conversation that needs to be had. And it can only be had when you are understanding of the scriptures that you say you believe and read, the Jesus you say you believe and follow. You are able to stand and say, look, I know you're going to disagree with me on this. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you, but I'm just telling you that the God you worship is a false God that is going to lead you straight to hell, but you're going to feel like you're doing something all the way up until death. But the reality is you need to be reconciled to the Father. So when we see a prayer like this being prayed, it's being prayed to a demon. I say that not to stir up some sort of divisive talk or try to get your emotions all worked up and generate some sort of havoc. It's just to simply say that's what's happening. Like that is just simply the reality of what is occurring. We see it referenced in the Old Testament. We see Paul strictly pointed out in the New when he's returning to idolatry. And the reality is that is what's happening. Is that as Christians, we either believe that God is overall and he's the only one that is worthy of worship, or we don't. And the way we talk and the way we live out our lives will demonstrate that. Hopefully that was helpful. If you want to know, I'm going to link below in the description a couple of those links so you can just look them up. If you found it helpful, make sure you leave a like. And if you think somebody else will find it helpful, go ahead and send it to them. I'll see you next time.